What's up, everybody? This is George C.S.C. Samuels, and you are tuning in to another episode of Bitcoin Will Come. And today we're going to be interviewing Dr. Craig S. Wright. Let's dive straight into it. For those of you who are listening in who are new to this show and haven't heard of this man, I'd just like to introduce the wonderful Dr. Craig S. Wright. Hello, Craig.
Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's always a pleasure. And today we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of different topics. Hopefully we'll get through it in the hour. And we've got a bunch of questions from the community. And so we'll just select a couple that I found to be good. So I guess diving straight in, I'm going to share my screen. And just going to take both of us back to when I think we had this was probably like the first formal interview session we did with a previous employer that I had back in Australia. And this was back in 2017. And I don't know if you remember this, Craig. This was at a place called
quite
Iris.
some time ago.
Yeah.
I was on the screen up there. Yep.
Yes. And I think we had we invited a few other folks, across like Ethereum and all these other different projects. But a lot has happened since 2017. Which brings me to not too long ago, you won a pretty big court case. So we don't have to go into the details of the court case itself because some things are still, occurring there. But would love to hear about your thoughts, after the case finished, how you were feeling then, just that moment in time.
Well, right this moment, probably a little bit of extra grumpiness that I shouldn't have, which is because of node teams who keep trying to solve problems I don't really care if they solve, like all these relay problems. Like, what if something happens? Well, not my problem. I don't care.
Yeah.
This is the issue. People sit there, developers, I know their heart's in the right place, but
Good intentions, right? Sometimes is the road to
exactly.
hell. Yeah.
Yep. If you have a job to create something simple, don't make it extra complex.
Yeah. Have you found over your years with working with, developers and engineers that this tends to be like a common trait that they like to overcomplicate things?
Yes. And this is actually why I prefer waterfall. None of this sort of sprints, etc. Personally, I think you define everything you want. You document in sort of flow diagrams and all the rest, and then you code, which is what I actually did. I didn't write up the white paper or anything straight away, but I actually diagrammed everything out because I'm old-fashioned. I used flow diagrams, actor diagrams, all this sort of stuff before I actually did Bitcoin, and that's why it actually worked.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen over the last decade that something that you tried to make simple, people have misinterpreted a lot of what you've written. So,
yes, example being attempting to put fraud proofs and other such things in. Why the hell? You don't need to do any of that. It's actually much simpler than people expect. And all these, we've got to do X, Y, Z. No, you really don't.
Yeah.
That's the problem. People who are developers have got to learn that if you're given a task, do the task. You don't need to keep going through and doing much more. Honestly, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And, looking back, right, do you think, with these type of court cases that have occurred, do you think going back, what do you think if things had panned out differently? Like if you had done something differently, do you think that a lot of these court cases wouldn't need to have happened or occurred?
No, I don't.
You think they still would have happened?
Oh, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
We got too many anarchists have come on board. How am I going to do something differently?
Yeah.
You don't know the people. Mr. Antonopoulos, for instance, was literally a homeless bum before Bitcoin came along. How do you know that? Everyone who comes onto a web forum, you do an investigation and then you assume the worst. You don't give them the benefit of the doubt. It doesn't work that way.
Yep. And with this trial, there was definitely a lot of attention on it. And I remember you making a comment that how you felt like you had aged a couple years, within just a couple months.
Bits and
Yeah,
pieces, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, with this, I guess, finally over, what is sort of like the next thing that you have your sights set on?
Oh, well, is it really over? I mean, I've still got
True.
Copa. I
Yes.
mean, probably the first person to get different social media and Silicon Valley companies like Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg to put behind their enmity and join together for a common purpose.
Yeah, I mean it's quite insane, like what's been happening. And for
Hmm.
those who are listening who don't know who Copa is, do you want to just share who Copa consists of and what they're about?
Oh, basically, they're a bunch of Silicon Valley a-holes who have this idea that I'm the Antichrist because I don't want to proverbially rape everyone's out because of their data and information. I want a world where companies like Facebook go out of money very quickly because they won't be making money from advertising, and I can't see them actually doing it properly from micropayments. They
Yeah.
could have once.
Yeah.
But a world where individuals own their own data, that none of this sort of selling information is even considered to be allowable.
Yeah. And again, for those who are listening, right, and who are still new to all of this, how does Bitcoin undermine the business models of these large companies like Facebook, Twitter, etc.? Why is it such a threat?
Well, basically, it gives a methodology for providing direct connectivity for having a not a closed garden, but an open business model.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these guys run around talking about how they're completely open and whatever else. The irony, for instance, is Facebook is running around saying how it's joined the COPA sort of thing to share all of its patents, failing to note that the day before they joined COPA, they sold every patent that they had in digital currency, which
Interesting.
was, by the way, their fifth attempt at screwing up.
Mm.
So, I mean, so they've tried 5 times and managed to fail 5 times,
Mm.
which is an interesting position for Facebook.
Yeah.
Same sort of thing with Mr. Dorsey and his companies. Um, it
Yeah.
doesn't say much for Silicon Valley when they can't do these things.
um, yeah. So I guess there's a bit of smoke and mirrors, right? With all of these moves to try and make it look like it's all about the community. But
Hmm.
what are they doing behind the scenes, from what you've observed, that might be in opposition to what they say they're doing?
Oh, everything.
Mm.
At the end of the day, they're about owning data. I mean, as an example, I don't have Facebook. I mean, there's a corporate account that I don't manage.
Yeah.
But very simply, for some reason, I get traced and tracked by Facebook. I haven't opted in. I mean,
Mm.
technically, that's illegal. I mean, in Europe, that would be definitely illegal.
Mm.
Potentially here in the UK, but there's also a lot of other sort of things that they're not doing correctly, which they have a lot of exemptions that normal publishers don't have,
Mm.
which hopefully will change fairly soon with new legislation being introduced in the UK, where they're going to have to actually stop hate crimes or face criminal action themselves, which is about
Mm.
time, really.
Yeah. A lot of people, I know how you feel about advertising, but for a lot of people, uh, like an average person who's used to free, right? Some people are willing to give up their
Oh,
data.
but it's not free.
Oh, no, no, I know.
Um,
I know, I know. But
I mean, people don't realize that there's value. There was, I mean, going back to 1999,
mm,
when all this sort of stuff with the web IPOs and things like that started, the SEC 20 something years ago, did an analysis and worked out that just selling your email address and a few bits and pieces was worth about $11. So all of that is just giving information for free that these companies now have. So by doing this, you can see the value of what it is. And the reality is Google's expensive. Facebook's incredibly expensive. What they're charging you and what you're getting. I mean, the value in Congress that someone calculated for Google for searches and things like this was put it quite high. But what they've done erroneously is they've looked at the value taken from you. I mean, like they came up with this idea that $33,000 worth of value per person, which is just wrong. That's the value Google gets out of every person.
Yeah. The
value that it should cost is about 1,000 to 2,000 for all of the services.
Yeah.
So effectively, Google alone are making around $31,000 per individual on the platform between everything they're doing. So
interesting. And what to do about like the human behavior side, because there's a lot of people, we often talk about the responsibility of large companies to take care of people's privacy, individual rights, etc. But every single day, people seem to, publish their information and their data freely, right? Because there's no, I guess, obvious cost for them. And so, what do you think about just the behavior part around most people online today, and how whenever they think about having to pay for something, even if it might be micropayments, how to shift that, right? So that it becomes something that is pushed to the background? Because I've noticed this as well with applications, even in the crypto space, BSV, and a lot of people are paying for things regardless of the consequences. Like even if,
I mean, it's a lack of understanding in externalities, and externalities have to be built into the cost. So that 31,000 going to some of these companies shouldn't be going to them. It should be actually paid out, and they should be required to actually engage and manage a lot of the things. On top of that, a lot of the problems with things like Twitter are sort of ones that were envisioned by even Plato with Ring of Gyges. It comes down to the concept of anonymity, and I'm sorry, but anonymity is never good.
Eventually it leads to...
You can argue that, what if I want to protest the government? Then have a set of balls and do it properly. I mean, Gandhi, not that I'm a big fan of him necessarily in some ways, but at least he was out there openly. King was out there standing in front of people. People who make real change actually don't go out anonymously. I mean, I'm sorry, but this concept that there are anonymous people behind changes is just wrong.
How about, when it comes to like governments and nations who are fighting one another, like, the US and Russia, and a lot of them are involved in, I guess, dark ops or, anonymous, like cyber warfare. What in those situations, like, does Bitcoin come into play? Because we're assuming there's always going to be people who want to play in the shadows, right?
Well, no, that's because of the way that we've centralized everything. Rather than having 5 to 8 billion people owning their own data, we have 3 or 4 companies globally. I mean, that's the entire problem. You break into Facebook, you break into Google, and I'm sorry, but it's not that hard. The Iranian government has done it multiple times. North Korean government have done it multiple times. If you look, you'll find that there are sort of known cases of Google going, oops, sorry, the North Korean government took all the sort of activists who are using our platform. Oops, sorry, the Iranians took all these people. Oops, sorry. I mean, there's a lot of oops, sorry. Now, the distinction, if you have 3 or 4 companies to break into to get everything, it's very simple. If you have 5 billion locations, it's nearly impossible. The function of decentralization isn't this collectivist circle jerk that many people talk about. It is to do with robust, secure access. So by having people engaging individually, having different methodologies for access, you have an incredibly robust and secure system, and that's really what it's about. So my background was quite extensively in information security, amongst other things, and as I was doing SANS, like GIAC courses, and also engaged in the industry, this is one of the areas I kept looking at. Unfortunately, the majority of people in the industry still don't get security or risk. They come from the perspective of just cut off access or do something like this, which is utterly wrong. You can't cut off access. I mean, one of the sort of key aspects of the security triad, what makes security is availability. And if you cut off access, nothing's available. So that's the dichotomy that people forget. You have to have access to be secure.
Exactly. Well said. Okay, so next topic that I got here is conscious capitalism. Now, there was an interview you did not too long after the trial was over with the Rivero team, and you mentioned conscious capitalism.
Yes.
Why is that of interest to you? What does that mean for the future?
There are a couple of movements similarly called conscious and conscientious capitalism. And in each case, what I really see is that these are the foundations of capitalism. Now, people don't seem to realize, but whether we're talking about Adam Smith, one of the key aspects is moral sentiments. It isn't this idea of how much money I can get at people. And even if we look at Milton Friedman, the aspect of what people take away is quite often wrong. It's that he said shareholder value at any cost, but that's wrong. The value wasn't money. So as an example, in Friedman's work that is made into a strawman and incorrectly done, Friedman gave an example of a non-profit hospital. And the value measurement for the shareholders, the people who formed that organization, would be the number of successful operations, for instance. So sitting there going, how much profit are we making? What dividends are we giving out is just wrong. The initial people creating something can set what they see as value. Now, this is an important aspect of all of this because just making money in the short term is the typical mercantilist, and it's not capitalist, contrary to what people think, mercantilist view of how the world should work. It is the concept of sort of usury and finance that many churches have been against. It is money making money for the sake of money. And that's part of the problem we have. Going right back to Aristotle even railed against this. The idea of what is natural in wealth is creating capital, creating goods, services, things. Money from money's sake actually takes away from the capital goods of the world and makes us all poorer. So we need to have money, we need to have a balance, and we need to have finance. But once we start getting into speculation just for speculation's sake, as we see in the crypto markets, inverted commas, then we start to get into this world of purely sort of non-creative gambling, and we call it capitalism when it's not.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a really interesting point that you bring up Adam Smith and the theory of moral sentiments, because we often see this divorcing of the moral side with the money when we're talking about capitalism. And where do you think, because I know you're a history buff, where do you think that started to shift or change, or people forget this aspect?
You're assuming that it's ever really changed. So Adam Smith wrote in opposition to mercantilist policies of the government, which were ones about how do we collect gold and build up big deposits, etc. How do we alter the balance of trade, all this other stuff. Now, the reality here is we're still doing it. So we sit there going, oh, the balance of trade hasn't. The balance of trade is always balanced, full stop, because the loans and debt have to be against something. you have to pay all your bills. So that just means maybe you have Chinese ownership of some of the property in your country, or Japanese ownership, or other such things. But it's not quite the way that people record it. And GDP is a horrible, horrible metric.
Yeah.
I mean, it is one of the worst sort of ways of measuring, and that's despite nothing else. I mean, it's a government sort of thing that is easy to manipulate for a start, and has no real value. I mean, you talk about maybe we should incorporate sort of crime and crime figures, which was something before the British government a few years ago. And the reason for that is if they called crime part of the economy, it would boost the GDP. I mean, think about it. You haven't actually done anything more, but because you've now said that something is part of the economy, it's now part of the economy. And look what we've done. We've increased the economy by 70% by saying that crime is good.
Oh gosh, yeah. So interesting that I think I'm going to add some resources to this interview for folks who are listening in. A lot of links to the things that you've mentioned, because I think they're important for people to go back and research. And I know this is also something that you get frustrated with, and I think I do as well, that today when it comes to the attention economy, most people just look at the headlines, right? Very few people go back and research. Why do you think that has influenced and impacted us so negatively as a whole when it comes to online communications and things?
So if we go back to some of the early and late modernists, such as Yeats, he was very much into some of these topics, as many others are. And Aldous Huxley, for instance, talked about how we were going to be flooded with so much information that we wouldn't actually see anything. Orwell, Orwell basically had the telescreens in every room, blazing out news and information. And the concept there was we have as much news as we can handle. In fact, in the Orwellian environment, you couldn't turn off the news. It was always there, always in the background. You could turn down the volume, but it was always something you'd have to listen to. And as a consequence, you were drowned in information. But the problem was with doublethink and the changing of definitions, you never knew what you were really hearing, and changing the future and the past became part of it, which is a very modern concept as well. The idea from Freud with to change the future, you need to change the past, which was part of psychoanalysis and psychodynamics. So what we're finding is we're entering that world. We're entering Orwell's world, Huxley's world, where we are actually doing it. And this is why Keats came up with a number of rather sort of banal sort of plays that were meaningless in a way. We have our Irish friend in Waiting for Godot, a meaningless modern concept, and this is really, we're sort of bombarded with something, but there's nothing of human interest, no art, no substance anymore.
Yeah, the substance. I mean, it's fascinating. You know, people, and we're seeing how the next generation, how the values are changing as well. There was a video I saw of a guy. He put out his phone. I think this was in LA, and he was just asking random people on the street. Showed him an NFT. Showed him a car of showed him a photo of a Lamborghini, and it was like, which one would you rather? And it was like, I'll take a picture of that, you know, that Bored Ape. And it was like, oh, interesting. Why? It's like, because I know the Bored Ape is, you know, valued more than the Lamborghinis now. And I thought that was really fascinating because, you know, in terms of materialism or the things that we like or want, next generation now are liking the digital things more.
Well, that's not really correct. I mean, that is just the typical Ponzi thing where someone is willing to buy into a bridge that has no value. That's not new. I mean, the inflation of sort of these things goes right back into the sort of early sort of bubble days of the South Seas Corporation. If you think about that, the South Seas Corporation, lots of promises, very little delivered, and then it went bust.
Yeah.
We saw the same in many other sort of like even old Ponzi there, Charles Ponzi sort of uh, did a whole lot of different scams, of course, and yeah, got famous for
There you
Ponzi sales. Yeah,
go.
bit of a flim flam man. I mean, he looks it. It looks like he's about to tell you to come in, come one, come all. Greatest show on
Exactly.
earth. Yeah.
Oh
You
gosh,
notice
and
this about a lot
Ponzi's.
of these sort of people. Unlike crusty, annoying people like myself, these are generally nice, likable people. I mean, you have to
Yes.
be if you want to set up a Ponzi and have people come into it.
Yes.
Eh,
And yeah, obviously a lot of folks do get mesmerized by the charismatic types, right? And then the ones who are trying to be honest, maybe boring, but actually
mm.
doing the big things, right?
Well, I mean, it comes back to the example of Amazon. I mean,
Mm,
going back 25 years, there were a lot of other companies that had no business or value, and yet people put money into them.
yeah.
And people sat there going, but this guy's an a-hole. And yet, yeah,
Yep.
who's the one running all that stuff now?
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. It's an interesting one. Okay, next topic. This is just a screenshot of around,
Uh-huh.
yeah, we talked about this earlier, right?
Mm.
Where people confuse, I think, maybe your take on communities in general. And so I would love for you to maybe share a bit about the distinction, right? About when we're talking about community as it relates to Bitcoin and, communities, as you mentioned here, that are built around. So, yeah, what are
I'm
your
not
thoughts?
ever. I
Yeah,
mean, Bitcoin's not a community.
exactly.
You can build things on top of. I mean, if you have a bowling club, a league, that's a community. If you have a church, that's a community.
Yes.
But people don't. I mean, Bitcoin's not a common purpose. It's like saying, I'm part of the electricity community. Really?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Why? I mean, yes, you've got electricity. That's nice. Beauty.
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of people who don't as well. So
Mm.
I'm sure they want it, but I mean, it's not really a community type thing. It's and thinking of that sort of social in-group, out-group thing is just asinine.
Yeah.
Are you building a project? In which case, use the best technology. Now, I like
Mm-hmm.
to think that Bitcoin is. My plan in the next, I mean, by the end of this decade, I want to see 10 billion transactions a second is what we can get to.
Yeah.
And very simple. That's my goal. I want the average cost of transactions doing that to be around a thousandth of a cent.
Mm.
Now, that's for normal transactions, not big, ugly ones where people are saving data and all that sort of stuff or making complex transactions, but normal monetary exchanges, a thousandth of a cent.
Yeah.
Now, that is something people can build businesses on, but that's not really a community, is it? I mean,
Mm.
you don't sit there and go, "Ooh, rah rah rah, TCP." I mean,
Yeah. Or
I
even
know
plumbing.
people.
You use that a
Yeah,
lot, right? It's like having a
I do.
community around a plumbing system. Why?
I mean, well, I mean, there are different plumbing. Like if you
Hmm.
have those ceramic heads, then I mean,
Maybe
then
they
there's
exist,
also
Craig.
radio.
Maybe they exist, out there. There's a market for
I mean,
everything.
yeah, well, I mean, I like copper, and done properly, it can be quite effective for a long time. But then transferring some of the gas lines over to hydrogen means you need to coat them now. So,
Yeah. Gosh, this reminds me. I remember we had a discussion about like science versus scientism. Do you think this
Mm.
is like that? Like what has happened in Bitcoin? Is it similar to that?
Uh, so what we end up with is people who have nothing else in their lives now, unfortunately. And this is in part because of the way that Facebook and Twitter have undermined what we are. We're not educating people properly. We've confused education and training. We've moved away from actually educating people, and I'll say that very simply as a person who is a mathematician, economist, and other such things. The move away from the basic things like philosophy, English literature, the foundational myths of our society are part of the major problems that we're having right now. So
Yeah.
that's some of the underlying issue there.
I think it goes back also to what you're saying, with Orwell and the other authors about, the information overload, right? There's just so much now. I've noticed that there are a lot of people in my circles where they often complain about like, there's just too much out there, like I can't deal with it, from Slack channels to all these headlines, and then they just want to shut off. They don't even want to take in anything anymore because it's like a water hose.
Well, I mean, that's part of the problem people do themselves. If you sit there putting fire hose of trash in your mouth from CNN, then what do you expect? I mean, you can actually read and find information, but again, people aren't educated on doing that properly. As an example, I had a good talk with my daughter last night about some of the problems in the Ukraine and the Russian Federation, and what we were discussing are some of the differences in from both sides. I mean, if you think about it for a moment, there's a lot of hypocrisy from the American side as well. The Americans were very upset and nearly risked a nuclear war a number of years ago because of Cuba. But if you think about the Cuban Missile Crisis, that was with having weapons right next to the American sort of soil. Yet people are very happy to say it's okay for Russia. Now there are different sides to all of these arguments, and just going, well, they're not democratic. I mean, it's more complex than that.
Exactly.
But the complexity needs to be addressed. So to understand this, you need to understand some of the history and sort of different philosophies of each nation. And many people don't understand the nature of how Russian sort of people think. It is very different to us. I mean, I don't really think like a Russian, but at least I can attempt to see the distinctions. And just sitting there and going, Putin is a madman is rather asinine. I actually think he's one of the most cogent, insane politicians we have in the world right now. Unfortunately, he's also very Machiavellian. But the alternative to that is you don't sort of back down and show weakness against someone like that. I mean, and which we have been doing. Like Afghanistan, if you want to go in there and do something, then you have to be willing to do it to the end. If you pull out beforehand, it undermines your own credibility. And you get one generation where they're changed, and people go, why isn't it changed now? Because it doesn't take one generation, it takes 3 or 4. So these people who are still in power in the Taliban basically take over and force the change that was there to be undone. To get rid of that, you need to be there 60 to 80 years. I mean, it's that simple. So if you look,
didn't think it through.
No, India. I mean, there are lots of problems in India. It's not solved, but the mentality is very British in many ways. In some ways, a lot of people in the elite circles of India are more British than the British. Which is ironic in a way. I mean, the British have become less British, and the Indians, some of them are more so. But that is because after a couple of hundred years of British indoctrination of the institutions, the schools, the education, then what we've created is a hybridized society that has embraced sort of that Englishness. Not that they'll admit it quite that way, but they really have.
I mean, so many of us are speaking English now, and it's quite fascinating. Okay. So I'm glad we kind of like touched on that. We might come back to it, but since we're on the European side, there was this article and a few other articles that came out about this report about the EU being on track to ban Bitcoin by 2025. What are your thoughts on this?
So basically, a German media outlet has noted that someone wrote a report. I mean, the reality is people write reports on every position every day in Parliament. So sitting there saying these things is just asinine. I mean, someone's written a report saying that X should happen, then someone will have another one saying Y should happen. I mean, this is just typical crypto sort of industry manipulation.
Yeah. I think it's also good to maybe segue into the topic of Bitcoin as cryptocurrency and, the differences, because you've highlighted this, right? Saying that Bitcoin is not a cryptocurrency. And
Liberty Reserve, eCash, eGold, they were cryptocurrencies. These were systems using encryption, blinding, the sort of obfuscation of information. Like Zcash could be argued to be a cryptocurrency, but Bitcoin's not. And people will point out that in 2010, peer-to-peer cryptocurrency was put on the Bitcoin website, but that's because I gave over control of the website and didn't really look at it terribly much in 2010. And that was Marty Melby and others. So, I mean, I should have been a better leader and more engaged, but I had other problems to deal with at the same time. So
yeah, and people scrutinize you on that all the time, right? They're like, but you said this. It's
unfortunately, sometimes I didn't actually say those things. It's like the blog posts that everyone goes, in your blog post, well, it actually wasn't my blog post. Yes, I didn't publish some of those things in 2015 and 16 that people say.
The troubles of ghostwriting, eh? Or like, trying to work with others to help you out.
Well, I mean, yeah, this is part of the difficulty in these things. Even now, I don't actually do my own blog. I mean, in this case, it's actually mine. And the original one from 2016 wasn't even mine. I didn't own it. But the current one there is mine. But I don't
this one, right?
fill it out. I don't actually. I mean, I write the posts for this one and then I send them off, and Sebastian and others manage and load it.
Got it.
So I, on this one, have control, and I'd be rather annoyed if anyone did anything wrong. But the one that people talk about from 2012 that said, Craig Wright promised XYZ, well, actually, it wasn't my blog. Sorry.
Yeah. The joys. All right. Next topic, NFTs. I've heard you speak a lot about NFTs already, but at this point in time, there's been, I think, more stuff coming in from the SEC and other governments, right? Looking at NFTs and be like, maybe this isn't so good after all. It's now become a way for people to launder their money. Not a surprise.
It already was. I mean, this is all these things are. Contrary to what people think, I mean, people love to say I didn't do X, Y, Z, but if you actually check out N-chain patents, you'll find that some of these things are accredited to us. And sitting there going, oh, but well, no, it's actually, you will see the dates when it was filed and all the rest, and it became public in 2016, and it goes before that. So the difference is I didn't envision high-valued crap art. What I envisioned was lots of small things. I envisioned having movie tickets, train tickets, sort of cinema tickets, the ability to have sporting entry passes, digital tokens for accessing computers, etc. And just if you take the British alone, sort of public transport and you take 1 cent for every sort of ticket that's issued, that would be about 18.7 million pounds per year.
Mm.
Globally, way bigger. So the industry is actually has potential far in excess of anything to do with this sort of digital Bebo picture crap.
I
But
mean, I know why this is happening though, just from a culture standpoint. It's definitely from the gaming, like a lot of like our generation growing up with a lot of these, the cartoons and animes, different from the animes that you like. But there's a cute theory around a lot of these NFTs because it speaks to people that are outside of the tech space as well, the tech bros, as they call them.
yeah, but no one's going to buy the things as if they're anything other than sort of the lowest form of vulgarity. Um, I mean,
We can have a separate chat about this because it'd be fun to have a chat with Ramona because it's the
well,
cute
I'm
stuff.
sorry, but most of these aren't cute, and most of them are anti-art, and most of them have ripped off
To
anyway.
you, to
I
you.
mean, the Banal and their derivative, and yeah,
Yeah, fair
I
enough.
mean, it
Anyways,
is.
yeah,
I mean, they are post-kitsch, kitsch
yeah. I
is the
mean, but
best way I can put it.
art has always been interesting though, right? So it's, when we look at
Mm.
the history of art, it's always a reflection of the times, right? Like, and what's going
Hmm.
on. And I had this theory because there's this Bored Ape Yacht Club. You might have heard about in BC, the NFT collection. And it is very much reflective, in my opinion, of like everybody who's bored at home, have nothing, better to do because of being locked up during COVID or whatnot. Maybe that's why it appeals. We're all a bunch of bored apes in our houses and have nothing better to do but buy these pictures because we think they'll go up in price, huh?
Maybe. Um, to go back about a century, we could think about Kew Gardens, which aren't too far away from where I live these days. I mean, I'm in England,
Yeah.
by Virginia Woolf.
Yeah.
And it's interesting modernist story, and just to pick on this again.
Yeah.
And one of her characters is the snail.
Mm.
And the snail is the only purposefully deterministic creature in this story, slowly plotting, etc. But in a way, I mean, it's a reflection on the common man even back then, modernity,
Mm.
working 9 to 5, a bit longer at that stage, just trying to get to your end of your life in a way.
Mm.
And this is what I guess you're saying here, finding an escape from middle class, sort of mundane existence.
Yeah.
But my answer to that would be go out there and do something, learn, write, create.
Yeah.
You don't have to relegate yourself to banality. You don't have to be quiche.
Mm. Yeah. This reminds me also of Disney. During the war times, looking back at the history of Disney, Walt Disney and the Disney films, like their style was a form of escapism, right, for a lot of people. And it's interesting now because of the times that they've changed, of course. People now look back at some of those old Disney films and say, "Oh my God, how could they portray, women like this, or how could they portray, people like that?" But people forget back in those times, Disney was an escape from all the war and all the, like the depression and all that sort of stuff. Back when it was gaining in popularity.
They ruined all the stories.
Yeah.
I mean, what happened to all the good stories where they had sex, necrophilia, murder, sort of werewolves, etc.
Mhm.
All the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll be a separate talk, art history. All right, we're gonna soon get close to the community questions, but we've got this
Mm,
last topic here about digital twins, right?
mm.
And there was an article about Singapore creating the first country-scale digital twins. How do you see Bitcoin playing into this in the future? And what do digital twins look like in a Bitcoin world?
Digital twins are digital twins. The distinction I think you're not sort of pointing out correctly is
Mhm.
Bitcoin can be a sort of immutable sort of record keeping system. It can point to a secure sort of distributed way of accessing information. And more importantly, rather than having a big crunchy single area to attack, there are multiple paths to secure everything. So I mean, I've talked before with the concept of the blockchain being the distribution medium, then you can have these devices watch rather than, which was actually an idea I got back in my working with anti-malware sort of software companies and things. A lot of command and control servers that were being taken down, what they started to do was watch for certain websites or fast flux domains that would pop up and disappear again, and just monitor. So if we had this system like a blockchain that's universal, we could actually make a secure way of managing industrial Internet of Things type systems or SCADA systems, and that would allow for not a connection model where I connect to the machine, but rather the machine watches passively, like sniffing the network and seeing what's happening, and it could get messages and even broadcast things that would be then able to be enacted on with no direct communication, and that could be much more secure.
Yep. Okay, noted on that. All right, so from this, I think we might just go into the community questions because there's like a fair few. And we got about, I think, 10 to 12 minutes. So let's go to here. Okay, so we've got this one question from Gavin Lucas. Does the Lightning Network and BTC generally violate the travel rule? And if so, what can authorities do to enforce it? And you might need to explain what the travel rule is for those who don't.
FATF is basically a global sort of commercial standard for reporting. Now, for AML, anti-money laundering, KYC, know your customer rules, there are conditions on reporting that need to be met. So, for instance, the normal $10,000 type rule is fairly standard, but there are also structuring rules. So if you're sending $10,000 in small chunks, that can also be attributable to reporting. Now, if you're doing lots of small transactions, not an issue. So someone buying a cup of coffee, who cares? On the other hand, someone trying to move money needs to be reported. Now, just because you're on a digital currency is irrelevant. The Arthur Badowski case of in Liberty Reserve, the judge actually came out and explained funding very well in the federal court in the US and said, look, it's funding. It doesn't mean money per se. It means anything. If you buy watches. So effectively, if you're doing barter transactions, that's still funding and it needs to be reported as long as the value worth is there. So if you're transmitting money between two individuals and it's over the amount we're talking about, like over $10,000, then you still have to report it. And in many cases where you don't know the identity of the individual, it's even worse. So Lightning is this horrible sort of terribly centralizing network because every hop costs you more money. So what do you think people do? They centralize into a small bank type network, funny enough. But it's also not that cheap. If you consider channel fees plus a percentage, if you're transmitting $100, then $1 of sort of direct fees plus channel fees, I mean, it can chew up sometimes up to 20% of your money. At the minimum, it's going to be 1% per transaction, and over multiple hops, even more, which even if 1% was fine, that's horrendously bad. I mean, we're talking about the need for micropayments, and micropayments mean under a cent in fees, and all this BS about Lightning being useful, it's not. Right now, I can send money for a lot cheaper than that, so why would I want to use it? Other than for buying drugs and illicit services. And even then, none of it's going to be able to scale. You have a whole lot of other incentive problems. Typical issue of people who have no training in economics and finance, thinking that because they've dropped out of computer science and can code in Python, that means they know everything.
Gosh, time will tell. Some people have to
The
learn the
other
hard way,
question, I guess,
yeah.
what can the authorities do to enforce it? Whatever the hell they want.
Mm.
The internet, this thing that you're sitting on, is not that hard to find.
Yeah.
So sitting there going, it's onion routing, so what? That just means you're going to have to start recording information. If you don't, then I'm sorry, but you're in breach of the act, and it's seizable. I mean,
Yeah. Yep.
it's just asinine.
Next question. Are you concerned about your security, considering so much is at stake in all these matters? I think he's talking about your personal security.
I think so as well.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just life, really. I mean, I have security guards for certain conferences and other such things, but well known enough, and it's not like anyone's going to hold me for ransom to get money out of me. That's not going to work. I mean, I'm the person pushing the whole recovery bit. I mean, you take money and I'll get it frozen. Take money from me and someone else will get it returned. It'll be traced. And this is the thing with Bitcoin. It is traceable anywhere, anytime, anyhow, which is the whole part that many of the BTC people don't like about it. I designed it to be ultimately traceable with no way of getting rid of that trail. That's why they're creating Lightning. That's why they're doing these other coin mixing systems.
Yep. Okay. Conscious capitalism. Okay, I think we talked about this already. Okay, so this is more of a comment from this guy. He just said about time.
Yeah, I know. I'm really surprised more universities don't mention it or anything like this. I mean, it's too much of the straw man idea of Milton Friedman, the idea of shareholder value means how much money can I make in the next quarter. Yeah. Which is wrong. I mean, Amazon's one of the largest companies in the world because they went 20 years with making a loss, and just basically telling people, "I'm building my damn company, go away." And people look at me, and I sit there, look, I have an aim to make volume. We're building things. Screw you.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make friends, but I'm not going to sit there going, my coin's going to go up in price, buy my coin. No, I'm going to damn well get volume. And by the end of this year, I want to get hundreds of thousands, if not up to 1 million transactions a second, and increase with a factor of 10 or so every year after that.
Yeah. So you have purpose, though, Craig. You know, and you have very clear purpose, and I think a lot of people forget that they go after how much money to make as opposed to building the asset and knowing that the money will come.
But here's the thing. I mean, in 10 years' time, when, not if, when I'm doing 1 billion transactions a second on the protocol we're building and working on, and we're increasing that to 10 billion and more. And we're undercutting everything. What do you think is going to exist? I mean, my calculations show that we'll be cheaper than AWS for transaction processing by a factor of 10. Now, think about it. It's not, oh, I want to buy Bitcoin because it's a coin. My answer to this is, in the future, Amazon's going to come to us because we're cheaper. Microsoft will come to us because we're cheaper. Yeah, that's all I care. I mean, the metrics I'm looking at the moment is that in a decade we're going to be cheaper than Google for processing, cheaper than any of the like Oracle for processing. So I'm sorry, but I don't really care whether you like the coin or not. It's just people will use it, and the miners will make value just because. Do the math. At a 1,000th of a cent per transaction and 10 billion transactions a second, which is what I'm aiming for. Yep.
All right.
There's money to be made.
Exactly, and yeah, it's the long game, right? You kind of remind me now of that snail analogy you used. Slow and steady. What developments are you most excited about in Bitcoin?
Uh, Scale.
Yep. Anything that can scale. Okay.
Yeah.
What are some specific use cases that deserve more attention and investment by builders on Bitcoin?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's scale and cost. I mean, they're the two factors that matter.
Mm,
Why is it's just going to be a data pipe, and if you think about it for a moment, what I want to be able to do is to get something where potentially a million sort of exchanges on a payment channel between people making sort of other applications can be linked into an on-chain summary that will cost them less than a cent.
mm,
Now, that will end up with being able to summarize a million transactions out there on the web for around a cent.
mm.
That's what I'm aiming at. Um, I
Okay.
mean, sounds boring, sounds, yeah, who cares? But if you think about back in like the 90s, for either of when I was in Kenya for a while doing one of my courses, or in India doing some work, there were in both countries I saw people buying matches. I
Mm,
don't mean boxes of matches, I mean individual matches.
mm,
When you go into countries where there's real poverty, you actually see people doing things like buying matches individually.
mm,
Now, we don't understand that in the West. We don't see what it's like to imagine someone in a shanty town in Mumbai having to have so little money that you sell and exchange a match.
mm.
But this is still what things are like in part of the world. So
Yeah.
when you're talking about, oh, don't worry, it's only $1 fee. Well, I'm sorry, but for someone earning $1 a day, a
Yeah.
dollar is a large amount of money. And getting people online and able to exchange and build and educate themselves and access information for very, very small amounts of money changes a lot of how they interact with the world.
Agreed. And I guess that's why so many crypto projects, quote unquote, today are pushing out a lot of the accessibility, right, for a large portion of
Mm.
the world, even though they like promote that we want to be inclusive and, allow this bank the unbanked and
Yeah,
whatever.
BTC, Samson Mao, Bitcoin's not for people earning less than $2 a day.
Yeah. I mean, that's wild
Sorry,
to me.
it
Yeah.
was. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Find your own damn project. It was.
What are some of your favorite animes? I saw you,
Uh,
swinging a samurai sword, I think at the last, at the last conference.
um, no, some of the manga I like. Generally, I mean, I liked Ghost in the Shell, but some of the typical demons with heads exploding and all the silliness. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. There were
Yeah. Fair enough.
the typical ridiculous sort of Japanese futurist type stuff.
Yep. Perfect. I know you've shared a few in before with me, so I can share that in the show notes.
Mm.
And favorite BSV app at the moment?
Um, mm, I like a few. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Sentby and Handcash are coming along very well.
Yep.
Um, the others, we'll see. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not that I do or don't like NFTs. I don't like that they're being abused. I mean,
Mm,
if people had built it properly, then yes. But right at the moment, NFTs are you don't even own
yeah.
the contract. So if you look at some of the patents that I created 5, 6 years ago, the concept there is to actually incorporate even digital rights and to sell the digital rights to be able to rent it out, to be able to allow someone to lease access to copyright. But
Yeah.
none of that's being built at the moment. It's just flogging off sort of fake bridges and things like this right now.
I mean, it's really just become about fundraising. I've noticed for NFTs and DAOs, like it's just a
Oh,
new fundraising mechanism.
it's not even fundraising. I mean,
Mm.
fundraising assumes that you're going to do something. I mean, and
Just
I'm
steal money
sorry,
then.
yeah, by do something, I mean actually do what you promised to do. Not,
Mm,
I've retired at the age of 23 because I managed to scum a lot of money out of a lot of people.
mm. Fair enough. Um, okay, a couple more. If you regret using a pseudonym on a white paper.
Um, yes and no. I mean, I
Mm,
would have preferred to have done it a bit better. I mean, one of the things that happened back in 2008 was I got told by people at Newcastle University that uh, if I screw this up, it'll ruin my career and all the rest. So
mm,
I probably shouldn't have listened. I mean, but I didn't know Bitcoin would work.
yeah.
I also didn't know it would be hijacked by a bunch of cypherpunk idiots. And no, Bitcoin has never, ever, ever been mentioned on the cypherpunk mailing list. Anyone who tells you that is either completely ignorant
Mm,
or a complete lying scumbag. And
mm,
most of the BTC guys are complete lying scumbags. They very much know that the sort of initial mailing list had nothing to do with cypherpunks.
mm. Yep. Look into the history, huh, about all this.
Hmm.
Um, and how are you for time, Craig? Do you need to go like right
Um,
now?
no, I'm
Okay.
fine for the moment.
Okay, cool. Just only two more questions. So,
Hmm.
Bit Daddy would like to know a bit more about the execution of your plan to help the world's poorest. I remember you were talking something about, yeah, the 1 billion or the 4 billion. What was
Well,
the?
I want to start eventually working from the bottom up, but
Yeah.
there's a lot to be done. I mean, the first part is getting the protocol executed and out there to the right stage.
Mm,
I mean, step number one is having something that volume is not going to be an issue, where if we hit 10 billion transactions a second, who cares?
yeah.
And doing that at a rate at under a thousandth of a cent. Now
Mm,
that's super critical. I mean, that level of being able to transmit information is part of this. When you can have that, then anyone can get access and they can have access to the internet, etc. Now they can do it packet by packet. They can, and it can also be that they start learning how to do some simple tasks online where they earn money as well, all sorts of things.
mm,
So, I mean, it's going to be something where it has to engage people. So, um, I'm not a person who flicks his fingers and says, "This is what we're doing."
yeah.
I'm one who plans decades. So,
Yeah.
um, in doing this, it means building a system that will allow people to engage long term. And yes, you can say that there's people who need it now, but people always will need something. And it's better to build the foundation correctly, in my opinion.
Mm. Yeah, and I think this goes back to what were referring to about waterfall versus like agile practices, right?
Mm,
Mm.
yeah. What can I say?
Optimizing for different things. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. Okay. Aha. What is your favorite chess opening?
uh, Probably still a silly. I still like knights.
Okay. So there you go, Batister. Your answer on what your favorite chess opening is. Okay. So now, essentially, for to wrap up, I think the question that I wanted to leave, at least your answer, and leave it with everybody, is what are you looking forward to this year, 2022? Because I know you hinted at some things a while back, but yeah, I think you said something about a harvest, but I'll leave that to you. 2022, what are you looking forward to this year?
Uh, in the next few weeks, people will start to figure out some of what I'm doing.
Yep.
Um, exactly when depends on a number of things out of my control, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's the way the world works. If I had
Yeah.
my way, they'd already be in play. But
Yeah, timing on things, huh? Ah, gosh.
Mhm.
Yeah. Better just be like
Yep,
soon TM.
18 months.
Exactly. All right. And thank you so much, Craig, for your time. It's always a pleasure. I know we'll definitely do this again. I hope to see you again soon as well, somewhere in the world. And yeah, please say hello to Ramona for me.
Will do.
All right, Craig. Thanks.
Catch you later.